Welcome everybody to today's video. This is Elections Retrospective where we discuss American politics, elections, and history. Today's video we will be discussing, or rather exploring, an alternate history scenario which asks the question, what if Wesley Clark had somehow become the Democratic nominee in 2004? If you're unaware, Wesley Clark was a pretty well-known general who handled the intervention in Kosovo in 1999 before he ran for president in 2004 and was a notable critic, or did I say 1994? I meant 1999. And Clark was a notable critic of the Bush handling of the Iraq War. Now, in real life, Clark did run for the Democratic nomination, but lost to John Kerry, only winning the primary contest in Oklahoma. He made a few major campaign mistakes, including only focusing on the later primaries, which wound up costing him the nomination. At one point, he was narrowly leading in national polls for the Democratic primaries, so things did go pretty downhill for him uh, at the start of the primaries. So let's say he visits the early primary states, which allows him to remain in the lead and thus get the nomination. So with that out of the way, let's get down to characterizing the safe blue and safe red states. States that were above a 5-point margin of victory, or will be in this scenario. Washington, California, Hawaii, Illinois, DC, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, and all of Maine. And I believe that is it. And for Bush, all of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Utah, Alaska, Arizona, Texas, North Carolina, Florida. Florida tends to support the Republican incumbent whenever they're running for re-election. So whether that be in for George H.W. Bush in 1992 or for George W. Bush in 2004, Bush probably would win it by 5 points or above, even if Clark was running. Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and Virginia. And I believe that is it. So the remaining states are, for all purposes, battleground states. So we're just going to go from west to the east and characterizing these states. Wesley Clark would probably run as an outsider who would promise to responsibly handle the Iraq War, considering the post 9/11 paranoia that the American public had. This could be a winning strategy and he might win the election, but Clark has his downsides. He didn't have many specific positions on many issues and could be seen as a confusing candidate to many. As well, the reason why John Kerry came so close to beating Bush was primarily his strong performance in the presidential debates. I'm not sure if Clark would perform just as well or worse in the debates, considering how little prior experience he had with debates and receiving the national spotlight. Another detriment to Clark would be the fact that he failed to make up his mind on the Iraq War and the Bush campaign could have easily exploited this to accuse him of flip-flopping as they had for Kerry. Another thing to note is Clark had an extensive military career, which could have been faced with much fiercer and heavier attacks during the campaign, just like the Swift boat controversy for John Kerry in 2004, but worse. So let's just get down to characterizing the states after explaining. I think that Oregon, that would go to Clark. My reasoning is I think that Clark would be able to expand over Gore's margin of victory, which was zero point 0.4, I believe. Clark would likely carry the state by uh, a lean margin. Now, my reasoning is Bush would probably lose support in the inner city as he had, and also in the suburbs and possibly the rural areas, considering Clark's appeal to rural voters and such. And let's move on to Nevada. In Nevada, Bush would probably carry the state. He would probably narrowly fall with regards to his support in Washoe County, but he would do well enough in Clark County to still win the state and do well enough among Hispanics. And as for Colorado, the state would probably trend to the left compared to the 2000 election. Wesley Clark would probably improve in Denver County, but Bush would still carry the suburban surrounding counties around Denver. As well, I still see Bush doing well among Hispanics in the state, which would ultimately altogether hand him the victory. In New Mexico, Bush would do well among Hispanics still, and get over 40% of the vote amongst them due to his somewhat liberal policies on immigration. Now, quote unquote liberal, he was just, I believe, lenient a bit on immigration. So I think that Bush would carry the state still with by cracking 40% of the vote among Hispanics, although Clark would improve over Kerry in rural parts uh, of the state in the southeast and the southwest, but not enough to push him to victory in the state. In Missouri, that went to Bush by, I believe, 7.2 points. In real life, I think that Clark would do well enough among conservative Democrats and rural voters to make it under a 4 to 5 point margin of victory for Bush. Also, I think that Clark would most likely have Dick Gephardt, uh, Gephardt, or whatever his name is, the minority leader of the U.S. House of Representatives, as his running mate, which I believe would help him somewhat in the state. So that would be under a 5 point margin of victory for Bush. Now on to Iowa. I think that Clark would do well enough in predominantly rural and small town counties, which were traditionally Democratic, sprinkled throughout eastern Iowa. And I think that him running as an outsider would play well in a state like Iowa. But then again, I think campaign attacks on him, like flip flopping on the Iraq War, quote unquote flip flopping on the Iraq War, and questioning his military service would hurt him and hand Bush a narrow victory. In Minnesota, Clark would do well enough in Minneapolis suburbs and the Iron Range to carry the state, which means, oh, whoops. And yeah, as for Wisconsin, this state went pretty narrowly to carry in 2004. While yes, Clark's credentials as an outsider would bode well amongst the white working class base in the state, along with rural voters in the western counties. I see Clark improving in the more rural western counties of the state, while Bush would make inroads among suburban voters around cities like Milwaukee, particularly independents concerned about changing leadership in the middle of the war on Iraq, or rather the war on terror, and concerned about voting for Wesley Clark, who didn't really have many defined positions on issues and switched his own positions on the Iraq War. So, with that said, I think Bush would actually carry Wisconsin very, very narrowly, which means he would win re election. In Michigan, Clark would hold on to Wayne County, probably lose suburban Oakland County, which narrowly went to Kerry in 2004, but he would still carry the state by tapping into the working class union voters. Now, as for Ohio, I think that Bush would carry the state by winning the counties which are home to the cities of Dayton and Columbus. Bush would also do well among the predominantly rural southern part of the state, although I think that Clark would, uh, he could improve over Kerry's vote share there, but not enough to hand him the victory. In Pennsylvania, Bush won't do well enough in maximizing rural support in the central part of the state, and Clark would win the state by 1 to 2 points, largely on the backs of the three cities of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Erie, and also he would probably win the suburbs around Pittsburgh. And that leaves New Hampshire. Now, for the final state of New Hampshire, I believe John Kerry was able to win the state largely due to his northeastern appeal. I think that if Al Gore had selected John Kerry to be his running mate in 2000, I think that John Kerry's selection alone would have handed him New Hampshire. With that said, Clark lacks any such appeal, and I believe that Bush would be able to carry the state very narrowly. His approval in the state wasn't that high, and I think he would win it by a narrow plurality, which means that George W. Bush is reelected with 300 electoral votes to Wesley Clark's 237 electoral votes. Bush carries both Wisconsin and New Hampshire, which voted for Kerry in real life. And I think that about wraps it up for today's video. If you liked today's video, then um, don't bother to subscribe, like, and comment, and share my videos. I'm trying to crank out some more political content just like this. And yeah.